Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 40.
What?
40 of Genn and Millie. This is 40. That was a phrase I used for a while. Episode 40 of Genn and Millie, where a Gen Xer and a millennial share the strength-based perspective through which they view the world. We are your hosts, Allison and Tess. Hi, Tess.
Hi.
Thanks for being in this new container space.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So we're here. You might hear birds in the background. We're here at Allie's home.
Yeah.
I love it. It's so cozy.
I like having the microphone in my house. I maybe could get one of my own.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
I brought it home last night in preparation for us. So I have a little desk in my apartment and where I work from home or do my schoolwork. And I set it on there because I didn't want it stuffed in a bag, overnight. And so I was like, oh, this could be so easy. I could just make my own podcast, talk about what I'm learning in school.
Yeah, you don't need me.
And I'm like, man.
The other thing I thought about was just how this microphone looks so retro.
Yeah, super cool.
So it feels like in the studio, did you ever watch the movie Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams?
No.
It reminds me of that. He had his headset on and he was talking into the microphone. Cool. And this microphone reminds me of an old school microphone. So as promised, during our last episode, we talked about, kind of gave you a teaser and a prep that we were going to talk about failure, better known as resilience.
Okay, but before we jump into that, I want to do a little bit of reflection based on last week's episode because we got so many awesome responses and pictures from people of their first cars. Like, I loved it. It was I don't know what it was about that question, or that prompt or that discussion that led to so much more response from people. But I feel like we got great feedback, really good thoughts about how do you bend the rules or what does rebellion look like. And I think we've even had lots of conversations, you and I, off script, off podcast, about our different forms of rebellion.
Yes.
And I think that's been really good and really enlightening for me because oftentimes I don't think of myself as a rebel, right, in the traditional sense. But I've come to see more and more and more how much rebellion, how much I push back from systems or from norms.
Yes.
In my world, right? Like we were talking about, some guy who was touting all sorts of conservative Christianity that was being actually really mean to other groups of people, right? And how I was like, that's really frustrating, as someone who personally is a Christian to see someone like that and say that's a person associated within my group, right? And so knowing that, me pushing back against that maybe view, reductionistic view of faith, right, is my way of rebelling, right, is my way of taking a stand.
But as I've told you before, Tess, and I think this is a good place for me to say it so that we have it recorded, I'm so grateful for your open mind and heart because you've given me a different perspective of your faith. It's not judgy and it's not condemning and it's not excluding. It feels very warm, very welcoming, very, I see you, I hear you. And you create a culture of welcoming in so many different ways. And I'm super grateful for that as an example, because that's not always been the example that I've witnessed. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And it's a great segue into talking about what we perceive as failure.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me in learning about resilience and learning about trauma is the focus and the opportunity that we have to not judge. So I will completely own and recognize that I am a horribly judgmental person. And especially to those that are closest to me. I can be extraordinarily harsh. And I think one of the things I'm working on in this particular season is recognizing where I'm not who I say I am and really working hard on that. I looked at or listened to a podcast, of course, with Maria, big surprise. But she had this conversation with Brene about why are we the worst to those we love the most? And it's a level of comfort, and I think a level of you can let down and let out.
Right? Be who you really are, which in all the rough edges that entails, right?
Yes. However, I think when people are going through times of struggle or perceived failure, that's the time when you need to lift them the most. And I've not always been good at that, as much as I claim to be.
Sure.
So I have a lot of work to do. But I think this is a good topic for us to think about. So when it comes to rebellion, what we perceive as failure. So I think part of the reason, and for those that are listening that know me from the Allison Horn, graduated in 1993 Exeter, they know me as rebellion. For those that know me as teammates, Allison Horn, 2015 to now, they probably see me as I like rules, I like structure, I like people who do what they say they're going to do. But I think part of that recognition for me is I see a lot of my rebellion as failure. A lot of my big time rebel acting out moments are in my mind perceived as big time screw ups.
When you were young, do you mean?
Yes, when I was young.
Interesting. Okay.
And that it also makes it hard to own. So I felt when we were talking about the vehicles, almost like I was treading on super thin ice, like the ice was just going to fall out and everyone was going to go, oh, well, here she is. She is a mess. I loved that my lifelong best friend, Katie, who listens in her morning workouts, she emailed right away and said, she made a comment about, cruising Maine that we talked about, and then, rebellion. We know one another for rebellion. Her mom was at Lauren's graduation party on Sunday and came up to Lauren's dad, Mike, and me and said, you too, and just kind of shook her finger because she now knows.
Yep.
Because in our adulthood, we've told Linda,
Shared her story.
this is what was actually going on when you caught us doing, whatever we were doing.
No.
And I love that the adults in my life, now I'm an adult too, but the adults in my life have said, oh, come on, Allison, you were just a kid. Or we knew, and I knew you'd come out of that.
Yeah.
Or I knew, we loved you anyway. That is really powerful. So we talked last time about the Trauma and Resilience Mentor Academy, and I listed that on our worth mentioning board on Pinterest. But I did take the resilience quiz, and I will send it to you, and I will also put it directly on the worth mentioning. The resilience quiz was a big aha for me. So when I think about failure and the reason probably why I got into the work that I'm in, resilience factors are based around the support systems that you have in place. So I am not resilient by nature on my own. I'm resilient because people believed in me.
Sure.
So I've been thinking a lot about, is this what drew me to mentoring? Is this why this work feels like it's always been a part of me? And I think when I listened back to the podcast I did with Hannah, I had this aha of, oh, I had strength-based mentors in my life, my whole life.
Yeah.
But now I'm not till I'm teaching and talking about it, do I think about Mrs. Weber? And do I think about Aunt Meg? And do I think about my grandpa? Yesterday I had a coaching call with a physician, and I was talking with him a little bit about the influence my grandpa was. And, we talked about driving and how he was the one who taught me. He was completely rebelling. If my mom would have caught him letting me drive, she would have been furious. But he was willing to do that to help me see that I could, to help me see what was possible. And I think that's where resilience really lies. Yes, it's somewhat in mindset, but it really is in your circle of support. So for me to reflect on, am I giving that same kind of support? Am I part of someone else's resilience package that they need in order to get through failure?
That's good. Oh my goodness. I love that. didn't grab. I got this flip calendar from Day to Day Quotes from Jen Benson. She's my manager here, and she gave it to all of us on her team for Christmas, and gave us each different calendars based on, you know, our unique strengths. Like, she's high individualization, and you can totally tell because they're perfect, right? So I got this one that has very like philosophical or thought-provoking, or just some really great quotes from all sorts of different thinkers, or people in kind of different faiths and things like that. And it was actually George Washington that said, "There's no such thing as failure. There are only learning opportunities." And it was something to that extent. That wasn't a direct quote, but it's it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. I think was exactly what it was. It's only a failure if you don't learn from it. And so that's what I love. Like, this word failure, I think is, I don't know, for some reason when I think about it, I think about a person who won't get up again, right? Like, almost like I don't think of a failure as a moment or an event. It's almost like of someone that embodies and sits with failure, right? That's when I think of the word. That's the connotation I receive, right? I don't think about a moment. I think about a person who won't get up again after something happens, rather than an event or an act.
Wow, Tess, that's a big light bulb for both of us, because I see it as an act.
Okay, so that's what I was thinking. I was going to ask if you see it that way. Like, when I think of failure, it's like, it's someone, it's a person. Someone who won't, yep. And that's what, like, I don't want to become a failure, right? I think that's been, like, in my language or in my, subconscious or something, right? Like, I don't want to be a failure. So when I think about that, I think of a full embodiment of a person, right?
A title.
A title, a label that you would wear, right? And I don't know that I've ever really met someone like that, right? I think even if we don't have a ton of resilience within our spirit innately, I think we're right. We have people around us who lift us up, and humans are, I think, naturally resilient, right? We're here today, some odd millions of years after we were created or the Big Bang happened, right? We're still here. So I think there's something in our human nature that has resiliency, right? So, but there's this kind of almost ideological person, or this idea of failure to me is within a human being itself. Like, it's a label for a person rather than an act, right? Because I don't ever see any actions or any decisions as failure, right? Because for me, and that goes back to strengths, right? That's my learner. I learn from everything that happens in my life, right? So I've had moments where I've made the wrong decision, but I wouldn't label them as failure. I would say I learned so much from that. And usually it's in those moments, the moments I made the wrong decision, I said the wrong thing, or, acted out of an impulse rather than thinking it through, that those are the moments I've learned the most and grown the most from. So that it would be the furthest away from failure.
Okay, so I want to strength spot and praise your parents, because that is a mindset that had to have been shown to you.
Oh, yeah.
And modeled.
I think in their marriage, definitely. I mean, they went through really, really hard times in their marriage, but they never gave up. I mean, it was like, we're with each other, so we keep going, right? There were definitely times where I looked at them and I'm like, they should not be together, right? I'm like, gosh, I'm so glad they aren't, because it's like detrimental for both of them and for all of us. But, but that just wasn't in the cards for them because of their faith and their belief. And that just was never an option. And we don't have any divorce in my family at all, extended family. And so I think that was just, everyone makes hard decisions. Everyone says wrong things, right? But in the end, those are your people.
I also wonder how much of it is your regional, your, and I'll tell you about this off record here in a second, but we just recently have been doing interviews. And during an interview, one of the questions, and I wouldn't have chosen this question, but it was a question, what are your weaknesses? Now, in my head, I use the language of lesser talents. Okay, so I would even sometimes rephrase it, lesser talents. And
what are your growth areas?
One of the people interviewing said, "Oh, you mean my learning opportunities?" And I mean, I loved it.
You weeped, probably.
I just clapped my hands. I did a lot of clapping.
These poor interviewers were like, I don't know if I'm like in a cheering squad or like an interview
or
panel.
I have to work on my, as you all know, I so have to work on my facial expressions. And the beam with pride kind of stuff that comes out of me, I can't help it. Also, interviews are so nerve-wracking. So my empathy heart, from the second someone walks in, I'm just like, it's okay.
It's okay. Breathe.
And I'm doing this with my face, just, it's all right. And
you're going great. Way to go.
I really have to work on that. However, I loved her response, and she is fluent in experiential learning. And that just, I mean, it made so much sense to me, but that is not how I grew up. That was not my family of origin. I was almost constantly reminded that I was not enough and not getting it right. And I've been thinking about this a lot when it comes to, we all have different experiences of trauma. All of us. And a lot of individuals, a lot of people can get stuck in that trauma, wherever that trauma is. However that trauma lays on our heart, and we can get stuck in that story. And so the story that I've told myself since I was very young is the story of being abandoned. Being adopted, losing my dad at a young age, going through some really hard things with my mom growing up, then having some major family issues when I was expecting Lauren, and not having family around me, not my family anyway, when I had my kids. So I have a very strong sense of, I could screw something up and you'll leave. And so I know that's a story that I tell myself, and I was just talking about this last night. I don't know if this was intentional or subconscious, or my learning from being a soc major. I was absolutely adamant that cycle would stop with my own children. And so one of the greatest compliments I've received recently came from Steph, when she said to me, I think part of the reason you can't focus when other people are around here in the office is because you're so present.
Yeah.
And that was very intentional about my being when I left home and started my own life. That I wanted people to feel unconditionally loved, and that I was always present, and there's no failure, no mistake, there's nothing that would change how I love you. Nothing ever. And to think about that now, when you step back and you reflect, and I look at a 23 and a 19-year-old, and I sometimes wonder, how did I get any of that right? And I don't think I did. I think you
definitely did something
but
right.
I think we all did. But also, they're just innately great people. But I was intentional that I didn't want them to ever feel the way that I felt. Generational trauma is a real thing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I can now look back and see why my mom was the way my mom was, because of how she grew up, and the feelings of abandonment that she had, and the way that she didn't know. You can't do what you don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. So if it's normal to you that you're going to be admonished for failure, or you're going to be potentially, I'm done because you screwed up, you don't know any different. And so I can think back and be so grateful for the day I walked on campus at Doane, because all of that went away for me. And I felt acceptance there. I felt a value. I felt talented. There were all these people who said, oh, you'd be really good at this. You should do this. You should do this. You should do this. And that was my world then. So, growing up, I heard that from teachers, and I heard that but it wasn't reinforced at home.
And I love that. That's such an echo to the need for community and resiliency, right?
Yes.
So I think about such a good example in your life, like if you're willing to share a little bit more about it, is when you went to Doane, the professors that said, you will not stop going to school. Like, you need to finish. And we want you to finish. And you're really great at that, despite your life circumstances changing drastically in the midst of school. And so, like, that's awesome, right?
You will not quit. Was the statement that was made to me, because I came in thinking, based on family responses and judgment, I had to quit. I didn't even think it was an option for me to continue with school. And when I came in to tell them, they were like, you will not quit. We won't let you.
Yeah.
And so when you take this resilience quiz, what you'll see are the questions are not so much around self, but more around
Interesting.
who do you have in your life that saw the best in you, believed in you.
Yeah.
And it made me think of this quote that I just received in an email from a mentor. My young but very wise mentee just told me last week, sometimes your lowest and worst moments can set you up for your greatest accomplishments and achievements.
Oh, beautiful.
There's no learning in easy.
Nope.
And as hard as some of the things have been for any of us, there's no learning in the easy. And so I think what's awesome about your mindset, Tess, is that you don't have to work at it. I have to work at growth mindset. And then it made me think of Shane. I mean, just always, these kinds of things make me think of Shane.
Yep.
Is that why Shane was drawn to Hope Work? Because he needed more practice? You know, is that why I'm drawn to growth mindset and the concept of purpose? Because I need more practice. And, you know, learner's high for me, not as high as it is for you. But I think I want to continue to learn life lessons. I just don't want them to be so hard.
I just don't want them to be so rough.
Right? Can I just get a little like free pass?
But I think it's interesting when you dive into, like you were talking about, your personal history, right? You have experienced a lot of childhood trauma, right? Like you even say, like you have your ACEs score is like off the roof.
It's
out of this world,
pretty
right?
high. Yes.
So like mine is, I think, 0. Right? So like my learning,
Seriously?
right? Like I didn't have any, you know, I don't have like any issues, you know, right? Like it's all perceived issues, right? Which are definitely like things I learned, right? Like the guilt I learned from the Catholic Church, you know, like things that, you know, that I learned and interpreted as a child, but I didn't ever really go through any trauma, right? Any experiential trauma. And so understanding that also could be why, right? Your approach to these failures or these hard moments or these traumas in your life, they were forced upon you.
Yes.
I seek them out because I didn't have them, right? And I know that they're growth opportunities for me because the few that I've experienced, I've been able to very readily, because they've been more in my adulthood that I've experienced these hard issues, right? And I've had to react to them and respond to them in a way where I've had to make a choice, right? Whether or not I'm going to take this and sulk in it and think of myself poorly as a result and self-deprecate, or if I'm going to choose to say, no, I get to turn around and go to work tomorrow and I get to respond in a better way, right? Or I get to turn around and hang out with my friends tomorrow and respond to them in a more loving way, right? So it's been a choice, but all of my experiences with quote unquote events of failure, right, or events of trauma that have led to maybe choices that aren't the best have really all happened in my adulthood. So I think that makes a big difference too, right, in how my learned response to that, because I have much more agency, right, and much more you know, not a whole lot, right? I'm 25, but much more experience to be able to take a step back. And I think that my understanding my strengths and myself are really helpful in that, to say, I'm going to take a step back. This is how I responded. And it makes sense that I responded in that way. But how do I want to respond in the future, right? How can I learn from that?
So I feel like your strategic comes into, it's a superpower. You know that you've not had the growth learning maybe that could have happened through some higher ACE score, for example. But you have but found moments of struggle and contemplation around, why am I struggling?
Yep, exactly.
And not everyone takes the time to step back and say, why is this pattern showing up? Why is this a trigger? Why is this a problem? And I think one of the best things that we can do as mentors and we can do as humans is to step back and say, okay, if I don't want this pattern to repeat, what do I need to look at and learn for myself? Not blame cast, not, well, if he would only do this or if she would respond differently, but really, why is this bothering me? That's hard for me because it's a lot easier for me to say, well, this person is at the top of my annoying list, so that's why I'm not having a good day.
And I think that that's a good thing to note, because strengths is such positive language, so it's hard to dig into those tough behavioral patterns, right? If you aren't approaching it very deliberately and looking at your strengths through those times, right? And so you can do hard work with your strengths and get into those rough times. And that's the beauty of it. We've talked about it on here, right? Is digging into the basements, digging into the negative, the shadow sides of your strengths, to be able to pull them out of the basement, to pull them into a more mature form, right? Is awesome. But I think the natural tendency of strengths, right? And you have high positivity. The natural tendency, right, is to look at it in a good way, right? So if you think, here are my talents and my strengths, and I'm going through a hard time, it must be something external. Right? There's that secondary, kind of almost implicit thought behind it, because there is such a positive connotation to strengths and talents.
Looking at the basement of your strengths is not the same as this is what's wrong about me.
Yes.
And I think we catch that a lot, Tess, in intro strengths training. Oh, people look at their top, people say this is annoying about me, or I know this is me to a fault. We hear that language all the time. When I first saw my strengths, and I can say this with total honesty and clarity, I could not believe that I was chosen to lead strengths development for teammates. I can still see myself sitting there in the meeting looking at Suzanne like, what?
You got the right person.
Right. And then when I took my strengths, I knew those words, but they were everything that was wrong about me. You talk too much. You overthink things. Oh, you ask too many questions. You think you have to be friends with everybody. And why are you crying? I mean, all of these were questions that I had throughout my life that I thought were things that were wrong about me. Very much discouraged in a lot of ways in my home life. The questions were constant. I remember being really little. I don't know if I've told this story on here before, but I was sure that my heart had stopped. And so, walking around. So I'm downstairs in my room. I had a room in the basement, and all purple carpet, purple walls, purple everything. And I came up from my purple bedroom in the middle of the night, and I went to my mom and I said, I can't feel my heart beating. Why is my heart not beating? Why can't I feel my heart beating? And I understand how annoying that would be as a parent. But I was constantly full of questions, and I needed to talk them out. Yeah. And that was often stifled. So I think that probably led to me writing and reading, because I wanted to get my questions and my thoughts out. And they used to send me to Monsignor, our priest,
Tell me that.
Who would smoke cigars and have a whiskey while Allison would ask him 5,000 questions. But
I love that.
I mean, still to this day, if I smell a pipe, it feels like comfort, because he would just let me talk it out.
I love that.
And part of the time he was probably asleep for all I know, but I could let those questions out. But when I saw those words, I thought, oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Because these are all the things that people are irritated by. And so strengths learning, when I tell people this in training, and I say this on here, it was life-changing for me. That is not an exaggeration.
Yeah, because it flipped everything on its head.
It flipped everything. And then again, so cool. Just kind of like Doan, I was all of a sudden in this container, in this circle of people who said, wow, I see your talent. Yeah. And you could be an incredible teacher of this. Wow. To have Jerlene and Melissa at Lauren's graduation, and to think of, 2010 was when I got to sit across from the table from these people I hardly knew. Now are mentors in my life, mentors in my daughter's life, and have taught me so much about the power of this language and the power of this instrument and the power of the way that we can extend it. So, and then I think back to, when you and I started talking about strengths, and I was like, someone else loves this as much as I do, because I didn't feel that way. It was, there was a lot of eye rolling. When I would do a strengths activity, it was kind of like, okay, Allison's going to do a strengths activity. And it was hard. And you were just hand clapping about it.
I totally get it.
This is great.
It's so funny. Okay, so, gosh, this is so interesting, because I've heard you say things like, my top 5 were everything, I knew was wrong with me, right? And strengths helped me see that, and it was life-changing. But the way you just explained it just, I think, really helped me click what a different experience we've had with strengths learning. And I don't think I ever fully recognized that. And I love that. And I think anyone listening can say, yeah, I get where both of you are coming from, and mine was even a little different, right? So I think for me, my reaction, I think, and I'm wondering if this is maybe where self-assurance falls. That's maybe my hypothesis, because yours is pretty low, right?
Way low.
Way low, minus 12. So it definitely comes up a lot. For me, that it was almost like a confirmation, right, of who I am. But also it was for me, my first reaction was, well, doesn't everybody think like that?
I know.
Or doesn't everybody do things like that?
I share
right?
that all the time when I'm talking with people, that was your
Right?
reaction. And that's a brilliant reaction.
Right, because we're so in ourselves that I didn't realize that people don't have little filing cabinets in their head of information that they just draw upon, right? I mean, yes, I could realize that in relation with other people, but to have it spelled out like that and to say, yes, this is what's different about you, Tess, but also it's what's uniquely awesome about you, and you can wield this as a strength, right? Like, it's helped me to understand and like course correct myself on a trajectory where I think would be best, right, for my future and for my goals, and also help me to figure out the best fit to roll within teammates, and just all of these things that I think I knew that, we all know we're a little bit different from the person next to us, but to have it spelled out so explicitly, in such an explicit way, to say, you have patterns in your head. Not everybody has patterns in their head, right? When you get frustrated with people, it's because you're 12 steps ahead of them.
Or I see their pattern.
Right? Or, yeah.
Their pattern of behavior. I'm like, oh, there it is.
And you're like, oh, gosh, that's enlightening. Things like that, or when I was just sharing with Allie before we recorded that, I lost something recently. And I never, ever lose anything because I remember exactly where it is. I remember exactly where I put it. And this thing, I remembered exactly where I put it. I had just left so I remembered exactly where it was, and I got it within 10 minutes. I had it taken care of, right? The thing that I lost. But it was still so disorienting, those 10 minutes of not knowing where I placed it.
So that's your context strategic, don't you feel?
I think so, yeah.
Okay,
for
so sure. I lose things everywhere I go, as you know.
Yeah, yep.
Partially because I have so much crap that I'm taking along with me. I have lost multiple cameras.
Oh my gosh.
The girls and I went to Vegas, lost a camera in the cab. Literally got out of the cab and went, oh, well, camera's in there.
Yeah.
I lose stuff constantly. Constantly. And I think, so I'm thinking, but my strategic knows it.
Yeah.
But I think the input causes some of it. Like,
sure.
Oh, I got to have all my 25 things right here by me. I'm very likely to lose something. Your context strategic, you don't lose things.
And for me, when I do, it's so rattling because I know I shouldn't have. Like, when things like that happen, like, so this has happened a lot recently, and I was like, I feel like this could almost be a separate conversation. But every time I've recently spilled something, knocked something like off a shelf, or made like something slip, or in this case, when I lost something, there was a thing in my head that said, you need to remember this before it happened. Okay, it was the most bizarre thing. And I'm like, I don't know if it's like Holy Spirit in action and that's like God's conviction. I don't know if it's my strategic.
You know what I think.
Or what it is, or, whatever. But I'm like, right before my salad dressing slips off my salad thing, I see it and think that shouldn't be there because it's going to slip. And then it happens, right? There was one time where I was... I was getting in the shower after I came back from the gym, and I put my phone kind of on the corner of my vanity, and I was like, oh, that's a little closer. I probably should move it, but I didn't. And then it was on the ground when I got out of the shower, right? Like these little things, or like this, where I was like, I remembered putting my AirPod case in the treadmill. This is what I lost, when I put my AirPods in to run. And I remember thinking, I probably shouldn't put that there because it's kind of hidden and I probably won't see it when I get off the treadmill. So then 10 minutes after I leave the gym, I'm like, oh, I left it there, right? So there's these, things in my head that I think are trying to prevent me from failure, right?
Or you could be clairvoyant.
Or, it could just be, yeah. I could just be a psychic,
Right. I do also think that that's so much the way your brain thinks.
Yeah, totally. It's like that is not the logical place for it to go, right?
Kind of like why are you putting your keys in the marker bag?
That's dumb. Sorry.
So, what I think is so fascinating about this test is how we all arrive at this level of self-discovery in different ways. Part of the reason I know this, part of the reason that I love doing this work is it took me too long to get here. And I want people to be equipped with the language, the understanding, growth mindset, strengths, purpose, all of those things sooner, so they don't have to go through the things that I did to get there.
Sure.
And I think that's why it's so meaningful to me that we do strengths with our mentees.
Yeah.
And that we're talking to students about what's right about them, that we're showing up for someone. I think we're all led to things for a reason. So back to ACEs, go to any conference where there's a large group of social workers, large group of people in the, human service helping field, and you'll find high ACE scores.
Yep.
Because we're drawn to the work of, I want to
maybe rectify some of the own wrongs that I experienced for somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's really fascinating to think how we are created to serve others.
Okay, so when we think about failure, I wanted to almost illuminate, so this is a little bit of a growth mindset story, and we have plenty of time, but I wanted
You're not worried about that falling?
No, I'm actually not. No. Okay. I'm actually not. No.
Now that you're clairvoyant, I feel totally secure
am,
about everything.
Yeah. No, actually,
good to know.
That feels very stable. There's nothing weird about that. But okay, so I've been working through this book, and I shared it with you, and I think I shared it here, maybe on the last episode, but it's a book called 5, and it's this idea, this almost workbook. It almost looks like a children's book, but it's a little more of like a workbook with journaling prompts and quotes, and it is, written by Dan Zadra. We can put it on the worth mentioning board. It'd be a great thing to do with your mentee. I want to try and find another copy. I was drawn to it at Half Price Books.
Great graduation gift.
Great graduation gift, right? I was drawn to it at Half Price Books because it almost looked like an Enneagram thing. And, one of my iterations of that is a 5. And so I was kind of like, oh, is this a book all about the self-development? It's in the self-help section, right? But it ended up being this thing where I was like, oh, I actually could really use that, right? That'd be really helpful. But there have been so many great. So the one that I'm really championing, the philosophy in here, there's 2 of them. One I'm going to share, one I'll share now that really isn't related to what we're doing, but I think is so awesome. And then the other one that's definitely related to this idea of failure and resiliency. One of them is how can you reclaim your Mondays?
Oh.
So Monday has the exact same amount of time as a Friday, but we approach it so much more differently in terms of our behavior. And so I have been almost making every day a Friday, which to me is a little bit of paradox in my head, because if you make every day a Friday, then there's nothing special about it, right? But so it's the whole, if everything is holy, nothing is holy, right? So if every day is a Friday, no day is a Friday. But it's this whole mindset of I approach Fridays. We all do naturally so much differently than we approach Mondays, right? Even though we love our jobs, right? You and I, we can say that.
Right.
I love my job. I love to get to do what I get to do. But I approach Monday so much more differently than I approach Friday. And so
you'll love that I've added a Monday and Friday meme to the concept of purpose training that I do.
Yes.
The Monday meme is so different than the
Friday meme. Yep. So approaching every day. So I've just done a few things like this week, went to an 11 p.m. the Avengers Endgame movie, right? So I got home at 2 a.m. and was at work the next day, right? Why not? If it was a Friday, I'd be going, right? That's all right. I have the same amount of time. So I just, did that and, hung out at a coffee shop or took advantage of a happy hour earlier in the week than I would have probably. And just things like that I'm like, why wouldn't I? If today was Friday, would I do this, right?
What a great question.
So reclaim your Mondays.
Yeah.
So this workbook says, what are things you can do on Mondays to make Mondays awesome, right? So I think I shared on here, I booked a trip to London. I'm doing a solo trip at the beginning of next year for my birthday and the holiday, and it just works out really well to take a vacation then because of the way the holidays fall right around the beginning of the year for me. And so I booked a trip to London. And so what I'm doing to reclaim my Mondays is research things on London to get excited about my trip.
On Mondays?
On Mondays, specifically. And so, reclaiming my
future
Mondays by
casting.
something to look forward to on Monday. So Monday, I get to open up my travel book. I get to unfold my London map and look at all the awesome things to do and plan
That's
it,
great.
right? So I just do a little bit at a time, but it's something to reclaim my Mondays. So that's that one philosophy that I love and wanted to share with people, right? So the other thing was the idea of looking for the second right answer. So I wanted to read this. Faced with a significant problem or setback, many people simply give up on their dreams or plans. Instead, try treating problems as opportunities to be creative. Realize that for every single obstacle, there's a solution. Discover the magic of searching for the second right answer. Here's an example. Suppose you and your significant other have been planning to quit work and spend a few years exploring the highways and byways of America in your shiny new Winnebago. Here's the problem. Now that you're finally ready to head off into the sunset, you realize that the price of gas has skyrocketed and you haven't saved up nearly as much money as you'll need. What do? Give up? Here's the second right answer. When faced with this similar situation, Daniel Ford, 57, and his wife Becky, 51, looked for an opportunity to this problem and found it. Instead of buying an RV and paying for all the gas and insurance and upkeep, the Fords applied for a job as a long-haul truck driving couple. Instead of traveling America in a Winnebago, they hit the road in a fully equipped 18-wheeler. Instead of tapping into their savings, as they originally thought they would need to, they were actually getting paid to see the country. Here's the principle. Always look closely for the second right answer. What at first appears to be a broken dream may actually be a dream come true. Isn't that awesome?
That's fantastic. You have no idea how meaningful that is to me right now. That is...
I just thought it was perfect. Like, it was something, like, I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, right? How often, even like where I'm at now, I look back and think, gosh, I feel or see that as a failure, or I didn't make the mark there, or my dreams didn't come true there, right? But how often do we look at that, and how often can we apply this principle to say, what's the next right answer, right? If, option one didn't work out, it doesn't mean that option two isn't better, or, so I don't know. It was just so good.
Well, yesterday, Hannah and I had a conversation with another mentoring program in California, and she asked such meaningful questions, but she was kind of talking about where have you seen teammates go, and where do you see teammates going? And I thought about, I can hardly describe the exponential change that's happened, and how grateful I am that I'm around to be part of that.
Yep.
That's made me think a lot around growth that you have no idea is coming.
Yeah. Sure.
And even on a bad day, when you get stuck, when you stay in it, you have no idea what's around the corner. That right there, that palm ferny plant, I don't even know what it is. I think it's a palm. I have no idea what it is. That thing was dead. And we were ready to quit it. I was disappointed. It'd been an outdoor plant last summer. I brought it in thinking I could save it. And then, Mike was kind of like, it's a patio plant, Allison. It's not going to make it past a year. And I said, I'm not going to give up on that thing. What's the harm? What's it doing? Is it taking up any more space than anything else? I'm like, I'm just going to give it a try. Well, I moved it. I changed its container because it used to be upstairs. So I changed the container and I put it down here next to my other. A couple of them are not making it, but some are. I'm not good at plants, by the way, yet. And that thing, see where it's brown at the bottom?
Yeah.
That was all there was.
Wow.
That thing has come back.
Yeah.
And every time I see it, I think, oh, I am so glad I did not give up on you. Every single time I come down the steps or I come in at night from the garage and I see that, I think, oh, I'm so glad I did not give up on you. And it's been this visual reminder to me that I really don't know. Yeah. I really don't know what's ahead. I'm so glad when I don't want to say endure, but sustain and be patient. Yeah. Because when I just let that thing go, it did on its own. It came around on its own time. Yeah. Not mine. And so initially I was kind of embarrassed by it. I'm like, I can't keep this crappy looking thing up in our front living room. Well, I moved it and it took off. And you can see all the growth at the base. Yeah. So I think when we think about resilience, there's a lot of it that's within, but there's a lot of it that's in our external.
Oh, for sure.
This has been a great dialogue.
Yeah.
For not having anything planned.
I'm like, oh man. But I think in terms of maybe some questions to maybe pose our listeners with, I would love to hear a little bit about when you think of failure, what do you think of? right?
Yeah.
And how does your prior experience, your childhood, your young adulthood, your adulthood, play into your view of what failure looks like? And then I would love to hear about what does resiliency look like? What are things that are internal within you that cause resiliency, right? If it's certain strengths of yours, if it's a belief system, if it's just history that you've walked through that you know you'll be able to get through, right? Whatever internal factors contribute to your resilience, and what are the external factors that contribute to your resilience? So who are the people that encourage you in the midst of tough times or times of quote unquote failure? Who are, what are the systems? Who are the people that you might not know but you might look to, role models? The podcaster I love that I talk about all the time that I need to send a note to about how awesome he is. I still haven't. But
that's a task you need to complete.
So internal and external factors that contribute to your resilience.
I also think, Tess, that we should really challenge people to think about reclaiming their Mondays.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that would be a really fun thing for us to share about as we go into the summer months.
Yeah.
What are you doing to reclaim your Monday?
Yep.
Because there were so many things that people could share.
Oh, for sure.
And what a great resource to talk about over the summer before we meet with our mentees again.
Yeah.
And then we could talk with our mentees about
I love it.
some of the fun experiments that we've done to reclaim some days. One of the things we're really working on this year, I am, is to think outside of what we've ever done before.
Yeah.
And to think about, for me, training and match support, what can I experiment with and how can I make things innovative? Mm-hmm. And I've really not been good at that up to this point. And I see how that maybe has held back some great learning opportunities because I've been afraid of risk and failure. So I think to be innovative and we're all experimenting. So let's try a new experiment when we think about the way we reclaim our Monday.
I love it. I love it. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add on here?
I feel like we need another session.
I know. I feel like we do too. Well, we'll cut it off for there and look forward to more dialogue with us about these topics. But we do want to thank everybody for tuning in to episode 40 of Genn and Millie. We'd love to hear what you think about this episode. Give us a rating, review, share this with your friends, and let us know your responses to the questions. We think that everybody's experience with strengths, everybody's experience and idea of failure and resiliency is so different. And so we're just the two of us are here talking. So if we don't hear anybody else, we'd probably think of a very, limited scope of these topics. So we'd love to hear what you think about the ideas that we posed in this episode. So you can do so by following us on Instagram or shooting us an email. If you want to follow us on Instagram, our tag is at Genn and Millie. That's at GENNANDMILLIE. Until next time.